Good afternoon. Really excited to be here. I think we have a really interesting discussion on data standards that we're going to dive into. So I'd like each of my fellow panelists to take a second just to introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Tim Fogarty. I lead data management for Essence Mediacom globally.
And I'm Jim Warner. I'm field CTO for advertising and marketing at Snowflake.
And I'm Chris Comstock, Chief Growth Officer at Claravine.
And I'm Lauren Fisher. I'm GM of Business Intelligence at Advertiser Perceptions. So some of what we're going to share with you today comes from a recent, conducted in August study that was done in conjunction with Claravine and Advertiser Perceptions. We surveyed 140 US advertisers, marketers. These were people who had roles that would touch a data standard strategy to really understand what's happening, what are they doing, what are the challenges, and what are the opportunities. Now, what we found was those who had these standards in place were seeing an average increase of 30% across the board for a variety of factors, including their productivity, their privacy compliance, managing their return on investment, brand safety. So I'm going to start, gentlemen, with a question about data standards. Just tell me a little bit about what that is. When you hear the term data standards, what comes to mind?
I would say from the highest level, it's just about establishing and engendering trust in so much of the measurement and the data we're generating, right? And so when it comes to it, certainly fulfilling all of those needs is very important, but making sure that we, at every stage, understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and its relative quality, such that we can really make good use of this stuff.
I think about Franken names. I have the scars back here somewhere. Those great underscore delimited blobs of text that come out of your ad server. And sometimes they say display, and sometimes they say disp with a capital D, and sometimes they say disp with a lowercase d. And just having to understand what those Franken names mean, what are the different fields. Sometimes there's 6, and sometimes there's 7, and which one is it supposed to be? I think for anybody that's dealt with those, the reaction to data standards is very sort of visceral.
Yeah, I think for me, we talk a lot about at Claravine, many of those similar things, and I think about standards are, I think phone numbers, addresses. We don't think twice about seeing that and knowing what it means. But when you look at those things that come out of the ad server, come out of reports, look at one dashboard versus another, trying to translate that and understand what those things mean, especially if someone else created it, is really challenging. So we think about applying standards, everything from naming conventions to what's on a link, to driving a customer experience, to creative messaging, creative naming.
I think about it at a higher level as well, right? It's hygiene. It's just your way of organizing everything and keeping it clean and, standardized, for lack of a better phrase, within your organization. And that data can be used for everything from marketing to advertising to even things that you would do in the back end. And chances are you're using a lot of data for those functions that isn't just from your advertising and marketing. We asked in the survey the respondents, what do you consider a data standard strategy? And some people described it as a playbook for keeping their data in good shape, deciding how they format and handle their data to make sure it's accurate, it plays well with other systems, deciding what the data should look like, making sure that it is consistent, accurate, right? So this is really what we're talking about today. And as you saw, the benefit to this is really having those efficiencies and getting that extra value out of what you're putting into your data standards. I'd like to bring up a quick poll, just out of curiosity. We wanted to take a quick poll to understand where you all are in your journey with data standards practices. I'm going to start talking again while you're working on that. We talked about what data standards are. We talked about the benefits at a high level that they can bring to organizations, but let's talk a little deeper about why they actually matter. In our study, we did again find that the vast majority of respondents agree that putting these practices in place is a must to move forward in a privacy-centric way, and that there's a competitive advantage, right? 86% agreed that if they don't have data standards practices, their organization is going to fall behind competitors or lose market share over time. So, gentlemen, why does this matter? You know, what specifically does this do for marketers or agencies? Why is it critical? Jim, I'm going to start with you.
I mean, I think, you know, in order to effectively target, in order to effectively measure, you have to understand what your data is, what it means, and that has to be sort of across your full stack.
Yeah, I'd say that we see a lot of customers that, I mean, it can take weeks or months sometimes to actually build the dashboards, understand the data, understand what, you know, who created what campaign, if it was set up properly, and actually trust it. So we see that, you know, that time to insight, decision, optimization be just, you know, completely shortened down if there's a common understanding of the data standards through the naming conventions and other things.
Great.
I have to say I'm a little bit jealous of your weeks to get that done. That sounds like a optimal kind of setup, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think pretty similarly, like at every step where you have a transformation, you know, some data collection happening, each of these beyond just naming conventions, you know, there are still human hands touching a lot of this, or factoring into the creation and you know, passing along of this data for good and for bad. And you can't just let people do that, right? Like there have to be steps in place to make sure that we've got, like, is it good? Is it doing what we said it was going to do? Is it saying what we hope it would say? Without that, you just lose trust, you lose use, and it's just kind of a waste of time and money.
Right, and it's really siloed, right? If you have all these different hands touching it without a larger overarching strategy in place.
Yeah.
So hooray for the 3 and 5 of you who say that you have a data standards practice in place. That's great. An additional quarter of you are working on one, which is even better. We did find in the study that similar portions were saying that they had a practice in place. To your point about weeks for getting that in order, most people said it takes about a year to really get that moving. So I think that's an important thing to raise, right? Is that this isn't something that happens overnight. This isn't just all of a sudden a massive undertaking. For most people, it starts with small steps and little pieces of the journey. So I want to talk a little bit as well about something you touched on, which was about all the different hands and all the different ways that we're sharing this information. We did find that some of the biggest challenges are associated with standardizing those data sets, knowing what's important and valuable, and the lack of direct access to systems and software that contain necessary data, right? So, and I'm sure a lot of you are feeling this as well, it can be difficult to get your hands on what you need. It can be difficult to even know what you need. And then you have the challenge as well, and I think, Jim, you brought this up, of the naming conventions and the taxonomy and all that type of stuff. These often lead to challenges with how we share that information, right? We're packaging up at the organization and then we're sharing it with our agency, a third party, our media partner. You find that 2 and 5 are using APIs or third parties to facilitate the transfer of this information. It could be a data onboarder or someone else that they're using to properly package and share. The second most common method, though, is sharing that information through Excel or Sheets, and that is often through email. So I'm curious, Chris, why do you think so many teams are still taking that approach? Why do you think they're using Excel? Especially when we think about some of the benefits of data standards, which are very privacy focused.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy. It's what everyone's used. Change sometimes can be hard. Where we've seen success in that change is that you still can use Excel for different teams, but there's got to be an alignment across the teams where data standards have been made a priority. There's usually a concerted effort to move out of Excel, move into different solutions. But it's I think change is hard, and if the incentives aren't aligned to make the change across the teams, and they don't understand why they're being asked to make change, that sometimes it's hard if you're asking someone to do something different in their day.
Jim?
Yeah, I think it's often organizational. I think there's kind of two types of organizations, broadly speaking. There's people who have kind of invested in having a single source of truth for their data, and then there's organizations that haven't. And even when an organization has invested in having a single source of truth for their data, that doesn't mean that all of the teams within that organization have access to that data. And so I think it's really about organizational alignment around kind of data and systems.
Yeah, I definitely find that the access is a huge problem, and often one of the big reasons that Excel is still so prevalent. It's for a lot of companies internally the easiest way to share it, and then the person who's the one ultimately uploading through API or activating that data with a media partner is not the one who has the permission to pull it. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we see for sure. And then also about the incentivizing, I think that's very true as well, right? If there's no incentive to change that system, then it's not going to change.
How many IT teams are thinking about getting data over to their agency, right? And
Right.
planning for how that translation and that transfer of data is going to happen? Not many.
And the intention's decent, right? The intention is to keep things separate so you don't have people operating systems with sensitive information that they shouldn't be. But ultimately, it does lead to some challenges. Data standards on a personalization and ad creative front. This was really interesting. We were asking some questions around the benefits of data standards and at a higher level, current practices today with regard to serving the right message to the right consumer. We found that on average, respondents said that 1 in 4 of their ads were served to the wrong consumer. For agencies, that was even higher. It was 3 in 10. They did generally believe that if they were able to fix that problem, they would see efficiencies of about 30%. So Tim, everyone talks about personalization, but obviously it's a challenge to execute at scale. I think this is even more difficult with some of the signal loss that's coming into play. What have you seen as the most effective way for brands or agencies to deliver on that promise of serving the right message to the right consumer?
I feel like in my career, I do nothing but deliver bad news. Like that's the job, right? We want a simple, easy set of steps to make all of this happen. And the real way to do it is to go check afterwards, right? To evaluate these segments, to see, did they do that? To enrich it with other data sets, to really understand exactly, like, was this the right person? We were laughing before we came on here. Every ad server thinks I speak Spanish. I do not speak Spanish. Like, I get a lot of those ads, and it just happens, and it's because no one's checking and because no one's really doing that due diligence. It's not the perfect straight line solution because it requires duplication of effort and checking things, and a healthy bit of distrust that we don't always want to acknowledge has to exist to be successful in the space. But we need to do it.
Yeah. Great. Data clean rooms, obviously a super hot topic. We asked about this as well. We did find 2 in 3 were using data clean rooms. I will caveat that we surveyed advertisers or marketers that were spending more than $50 million on digital advertising annually. So the reality is that is a higher portion of respondents using data clean rooms than you would typically find out in the wild. That said though, respondents definitely see the value of clean rooms, whether or not they are using them today. You had 4 in 5 who said that even though they're not using them, they trust the validity of the data clean room output. Certainly, this is one of many tools that can be used effectively for data standards. Curious to know, Jim, where does this fit in the larger data standards conversation?
Yeah, I mean, data clean rooms are great, right? They allow 2 or more parties to come together and share data in a privacy-safe way. And that's obviously important for targeting, for measurement. But you still ultimately, the clean room is only as good as the data that you put in it. So if you're putting in messy data, if you're putting in exposure information where you don't know if it was a display ad or a CTV ad, then you're not going to be able to do the measurement you want. You're not going to be able to do the targeting you want. So you still need clean data to put in them.
Chris?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I mean, Facebook is effectively a clean room, and Amazon has been around before the term clean room became a thing. The fragmentation of everyone basically being an ad network these days, it's just gotten more complicated. And so when you think about, it's great that we have the privacy, sharing and not having to send log files around. It becomes even more important to understand all these different data sets, and you need to understand the inputs to be able to understand the outputs as things are getting aggregated. So I think for the brands to organize and prioritize the naming conventions and the relationship between what creative message was targeted, as you look at that aggregate data sources, it just becomes essential.
It does, and I love the point that you touched on, just talking about the fact that Facebook has a clean room, right? I think there is still a lot of confusion out in the industry as to what a clean room is and who provides a clean room. And I think the reality is that there are a lot more advertisers who are using clean room capabilities than they may think. The good news about that is that these practices are already in place. The bad news about that is the fragmentation, right? This is one additional tool where you are potentially using multiple clean rooms to, for various reasons. So I think here again, just really making sure that you're very mindful of what's going in, that you understand very well what's coming out, and then how that translates to your larger classification, taxonomy is really critical to move forward. Thinking about the fact that this is an area where, the reality is advertisers recognize that it's important for, not just the longevity of their ability to measure, but also potentially the longevity of their career. I think it's really critical to keep in mind that, when we're thinking about what this means for an organization, it's something that is important at a macro level for them to justify the value of their job, but also sometimes literally to justify their job. 4 and 5 said if they can't properly show the return on investment or return on ad spend, they feel that they could actually lose their job. It would seem like that would be a very prodding reason to put these practices into place, but the reality is we often see these strategies take a backseat to more pressing organizational issues or immediately revenue impacting things. Tim, how do you think we can change this behavior?
We need good CMOs at every advertiser on the planet, I think is probably the first step. You have to have the time and space to think about things, to evaluate, and to make those strategic decisions built on top of so many of these processes. And without that pause, it can't happen. And I think that's really where it comes down to, is that there are many new ways and interesting ways that we can aid the decisions we have to make, where we're putting our focus and putting our time. But realistically, if you're told every morning at 7:30 that if we don't hit X in revenue today, well, you're probably not going to sit back and come up with a new strategy. You're probably just going to freak out and try and spend as much money in those places that have been proven in the past to work. Like we've seen a couple times in the survey results, unless you're continuously thinking about these things and giving yourself and your teams the space to evaluate, reconsider what that means, and then move on from it, you're just going to watch your share diminish. You're going to watch your returns diminish. It's something where it continues to eat away, and you have to stay fresh and have to continuously think about what this means. Without that, you're not going to get anything good.
Yeah, I think that's so right. And the permission, right?
Yeah.
To be able to go to your CMO and say, hey, we have a problem. I'm having trouble plugging these holes. I think that's the challenge, right? Is that for most organizations, that's not acceptable. So now you're in a situation where if you say that, you could lose your job. But if you don't fix it, you could lose your job. So where's the win, right?
Capitalism, baby.
Oh, man. Also talking about, this actually I love so much. We asked questions about the reporting process and who touches what and how quickly and efficiently organizations can identify things like a manual data entry error. And we found that it took on average 8 people at an organization to fix manual data entry errors, and that the average or median length of time it took to do this was 2 to 3 days. So when we think about the waste, right, that can be associated with not having a really good handle on where the data is, who touches it, how to quickly get a view into what's going on, that's where a lot of the challenges come in. And so you can see that, generally everyone agrees, yeah, there's a cost to my business if I can't do this. For 1 in 5, they estimated that cost was significant, and certainly, it can be. So, Chris, what do you think is the biggest risk to a brand if they don't embrace the lack of signal and continue operating as they have for years?
Yeah, I think back to the prioritization of actually pausing. There's always a new acronym, right? There's always something new, that new piece of technology. And I think too often we think about like that new piece of technology and that big, whether it be a CDP or even a clean room, those are just components of the overall kind of tech stack and kind of operations. But I hope maybe this is finally the year that cookies go away so we can stop talking about it. But you've got to prepare for something, and rather than waiting for that to finally fall. I mean, it's been, it hasn't been around on Safari and a number of other platforms for quite a while, and IDFAs and whatnot. So it's the risk of kind of, if you don't adapt for that change, it's always going to change, right? It's, I think was the companies and the teams that are adopting that change now and not waiting for someone else, like an Apple or Google, to dictate, what you're doing, and those are the companies that are ultimately going to be falling behind. So.
Tim?
I mean, this is my everyday, right? And one of the things that I think is it can be a tough conversation coming into something like this, is that it's not a judgment of the people who are doing the data entry that it needs to be checked and sometimes corrected, right? Like at every step, we have people involved, and people can make errors. People can get yelled at by their client at 7 p.m. to get the Facebook campaign up and running by 8 p.m. They're maybe not going to make all the best steps. That's fine. We just have to be prepared for it, right? Like, it's about building these robust systems of care and thought and checking. And sometimes the proper process can't exist. So what do we have to supplement and account for that, and still make sure that the data is good and usable and can feed into the models and the decisions we have to make?
Yeah, I agree. Wouldn't be a session if we didn't touch on AI. So, listen, AI is playing an increasingly greater role in our advertising practices. One of the things that we pulsed the respondents about was the use of AI, and generative AI in particular, for ad creative. Fascinating that almost 3 in 4 felt confident to some extent in their ability to properly tag and track assets generated or created through generative AI. We saw that about 40% said they were currently using AI for ad creative. I would imagine a lot of those people may just be testing the waters. I don't anticipate this is sort of a full-blown practice that's happening in a lot of organizations, but nonetheless, you see 1 in 2 intend to use this, right? So this isn't going away. With more people planning to use AI for ad creative, what are some methods that advertisers can use to reach greater confidence in their tagging process and measure success, right? We're going to have all these new assets that we're creating. How do we properly catalog them? How do we tag them? Chris, I'll start with you.
I mean, obviously having naming conventions and things in place. Creating more assets just puts more of a burden on the operations teams. I think that you got to be conscious of that and understand, when you're going to measure this, you need to have a standardization up front. It's great that we can create more assets, but you're also going to want to know what's working and what's not working. And being thoughtful around that operations and the component that it possibly could put more risk, to understand, are those assets actually brand safe that you're going to put out into the market. It may actually slow the overall process down. It may speed up the content creation process, but you got to be thoughtful on kind of the end-to-end process.
I think 72% thinking they're confident that they can tag Gen AI content is crazy. I don't know if some of you answered that survey, but you're overconfident. Before I came to Snowflake, I was CTO of a measurement company, and I don't think people did a good job of tagging the creative that they could make by hand. Right? There's so many shapes, there's so many variations. You've got one concept that gets, 12 different variations, and I don't think those were tagged well. So much of the measurement we were doing was through the third-party ad server, even if the creative itself was site-served. So half the time, we had no idea what the content, what the creative was, and that was before we could use Gen AI to make an order of magnitude more creative. So I don't think people should be as confident as they seem to be. And I also think that if anybody's tried to use AI to write a bio of themselves, you know that there can be mistakes and there can be problems in the models, and you still need to have a process in place. Right? So just because you're having AI make some creative variations doesn't mean that you've freed yourself from the need for those standards, the need for the processes, the need for the consistency in the tagging.
I would always go back to the idea of what does it actually look like to make these ads, and who are those decision makers that are sitting on top of this? You have to hope that in any of this, having a system by which we're evaluating the performance of these ads, that we can measure, that we understand what we're trying to do with them, and then to have, because inevitably, even with Gen AI in making your ads, you've got some ECD standing with their arms folded being like, yes, no, yes, no. There are human decisions being made there. And so as we have to loop back and consider what the performance was meant to be for many of these, making sure that that exists so you can have that check and go forward. Not to mention the technical infrastructure. I mean, to actually make this work and to get that data in the hands of people who maybe have spent their careers not wanting to think about the math in a way that they can consume and enjoy and actually decision on. That's huge. That's so much work to do. So I look so much at the upstream prerequisites to come to how this could be useful in a way that isn't just a press release. And if they are, the 72% of people who are serious about this and are taking it forward, like, it's going to be a big part of your life. And while AI will do a lot of work for us, it's not necessarily going to put us all out of business or out of work immediately. So we need to make sure that the human factors are accounted for and can feed in the way that needs to be fed into for those decisions.
I mean, I feel like on some level, it's a similar conversation we were having when programmatic first came out, right? Everyone thinking it's going to just take everyone's jobs, but to your point, it's a healthy mix of the human element and the technology and automation, for sure. So, gentlemen, for the 16% of people in this room that do not currently have a data standards practice in place, what is one piece of advice or pearl of wisdom that you would offer them to bring back to their organizations to start getting this moving? Chris, I'll start with you.
Okay. Start soon, start small, don't wait for perfection. I mean, too often I think there's the trying to get everything right. The one thing that I think we all know is that change is constant, and so just get started. It's going to change, even if you're, today, tomorrow, the next day, something's going to change.
Yeah.
I'd say align the technology, yes, but also align your organization.
Understand what you're trying to prove, understand the tools you're using to prove that, and then make sure that it works as well as it can.
And I would go back to the high level and really bring up the point about the CMO and a lot of what we discussed about giving employees the power to come to you with those challenges and really to talk through the repercussions and benefits of putting these into place. All right, well, thank you everyone. That concludes our session.